Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Schvetz, and I'm a developer with Chariot Solutions. We're going to start off today with a video from our CEO, Mike Rappaport. So let's see. I'm going to share my screen and optimize for video.
Hi, I'm Mike Rappaport, CEO of Chariot Solutions. Chariot is a technology consulting firm that has been, I'm proud to say, a part of the Philly technology community for the past 18 years. I wanted to take a minute to recognize and thank Tracy, Ken, Mark, Becca, and the rest of the ETE committee. This year required extra creativity, extra guts. This is something we're trying for the first time. And I appreciate all of the hard work and commitment it has taken to pull this off. And now you're actually delivering it. Something that I'm sure everyone who is attending will also appreciate. So thank you as well to our sponsors. And thank you to everyone who is attending. And finally, last but definitely not least, maybe most, is thank you to all of the speakers. I know that it's just as difficult to prepare for an online live remote conference as it is for a live conference physically in the presence of everyone else. So I appreciate everything. I'm sure it will go very well, and I'm very anxious to witness it all for myself. Thanks again. Have a great time.
Okay, that's pretty cool. I always like listening to Mike. Okay, so this is our 14th conference, guys, and we started planning it in August. And we've been using the same venue for the last 10 years. So most of our work is just putting together a great mix of speakers and topics to ensure that there's something for everyone to enjoy. And then by March, we were all set, and then the pandemic caught up with us. And this was like the first week of March, almost 2 weeks before the state government started closing schools and mildly suggesting that maybe we should all stay home. And we love this conference because it brings all of us together, but now being together was dangerous, and it kind of seemed like an impossible task. So we met and made the choice to bring this thing online. It took us a week to plan out what we were going to do, and we all worked together to find the right mix of technology. And a big shout out to Martin Snyder and NE Scala for recommending that we use Slack. And a huge thanks to our speakers, sponsors, and audience who stuck with us. Yesterday's performance far exceeded our expectations. And it was kind of like a triumph for us, and something about it kind of felt familiar. And as I was writing these remarks about how we face seemingly impossible challenge, I thought about our company, Chariot Solutions, the story of working together to overcome hard problems. It's familiar because that's what Chariot is all about. We take the stress and the worry out of software development, and we have our clients exceed their own expectations by working together to solve all kinds of problems. And that's a pretty rewarding experience for everyone involved. So that's what I wanted to say. And now for some housekeeping. Unfortunately, Joshua Berry, the Go presenter, could not be here with us because of a family illness. But fear not, because we found a replacement in like a couple of hours with Brian LaRue talking about Architect. And that is a platform that takes the headache out of working with AWS, Lambdas, including SAM Bowes that Jessica Kerr briefly alluded to in her presentation. Video replays are going to be ready on Friday. I know everybody got a link that video replays are ready from Hey Summit, but that's not true. They're actually going to be ready by Friday, and we will email you when we're done putting them up. Always please use the room Slacks during the talk. And for some reason you're not on Slack yet, I'm going to post a link into the Zoom chat immediately following my remarks. And then there's also chariotsolutions.com access for that. The talks are going to be announced in the hallway chatter, and the links to the talks are always in the topic of the room channel. Also on Hey Summit, of course. Any issues, you should go to our Slack support channel, and that's it for housekeeping. So now I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Michael Feathers defined legacy code as code that does not have tests. And we find that code very difficult to work with, and we find it a very annoying experience to write all the tests afterwards. And accessibility is no different. it's much easier to bake it in from the beginning. And we're going to explore this topic with our day 2 keynote speaker, Adina Halter, the person in charge of accessibility at Comcast. Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for having me. This has already been a lot of fun watching the other speakers. I'm going to share my slides, just a moment. And I want to make sure that you all can see me. So just a second. Share screen, and there we go. Right, and share. Okay. Can you all see my screen with the first
Yes.
page? Great, thank you. All right. Well, as Mark said, thank you very much, Mark. I'll be speaking about humanizing technology, what accessible design offers us. And as Mark said, my name is Adina Halter. I am Senior Principal Architect for Accessibility at Comcast NBC Universal. You can find me on Twitter at HaltersWeb. And I want to start with a quote from our Vice President of Accessibility, Tom Lidkowski. He said that accessibility is not a feature. Accessibility really is a measure of how effective or how inclusive your product is. So we should be building products and serving our customers and our workforce, our internal customers, in a way that works for everyone. We need to be able to have a mindset to open up our products to the widest possible audience, inclusive of people with disabilities. Like I said, inclusive design is the process. Accessibility is the measure of how effectively persons with disabilities can interact with our products. So engaging customers with disabilities, as well as our own employees with disabilities, is very important in design, development, and testing is how we emerge with inclusive experiences. So it's about products anyone can use. It's about inclusive services, and it's about a diverse workforce. I heard Tom also say disability is not the lack of an ability, it's the lack of a solution. So if we, as developers, do not practice inclusive design, then we're actually the ones who are disabling people. So when we say people with disabilities, who are we speaking with? I like to put it into, I call the 4 pillars of accessibility. Those are people with vision difficulty or those who are blind. By the way, vision difficulty or low vision also includes colorblind, which a majority of, or a large minority, maybe I should say, of people, more prominently, or more predominantly men, deal with. Limited hearing or someone who's deaf, limited physical ability, example of arthritis, a broken arm, that's a temporary disability, being in a wheelchair, ALS, and neurodiversity, such as autism, ADHD, learning disability, chemo fog, and aging brain. And I am a neurodiverse individual, so that really hits home with me in really ensuring that our products are also able to serve those who are neurodiverse. Also consider your products or your services are, you're probably developing them for the long haul. So consider those who may not have a disability now, but who are aging in place and who are using your products, using your services, and slowly through time, they may develop a disability. Also consider a temporary disability, like I'd mentioned, a broken arm, and a situational disability. What do I mean by that? All of us at one time or another have disabilities that are situational. Any of us has been outside on a bright sunny day using our mobile phone and trying to see the screen, and the sun glare is keeping us from seeing the screen properly, and the text on the screen does not have a high contrast. We have a situational disability. But above and beyond all of that, let's talk about people with disabilities currently. In a recent Nielsen study, they found that 1/3 of US households have at least one person with a disability. And some households have a member who has more than one disability. Often people who have a disability have more than one themselves. So you can have households with more than one member who has a disability, and or people who have that disability who are having more than one. In fact, let's take a look at households with disabilities. For example, 20% of households have a member, at least one member with a physical limitation. Okay, so that's more than 20 million households. 8% had someone with a vision difficulty, 7% with a hearing difficulty, 6% having someone with an independent living difficulty, 6% also someone with a learning disability, and 3% had someone with an intellectual disability. Knowing that, we also need to realize that people with disability offer over 200 billion in discretionary spending. So it's a large market, very large market. So I'd like to talk about two design approaches, and we'll talk about throughout the talk which one is usually the better approach, but people often use the less better approach as well. It just doesn't take us as far. So the first approach I like to call the curb cut effect. It's where you design to solve a problem for people with disabilities, and that problem just so happens to wind up benefiting everyone. So an example is curb cuts. That's why it's called the curb cut effect. I didn't coin that. That's actually a term, is the curb cut effect. And curb cuts were created for wheelchair users. But as it turned out, parents with strollers, bicyclists, people wheeling luggage, etc., all ended up benefiting from this curb cut, the development of curb cuts. So another example is the handicap push button. So trying to solve a way for people with disabilities to get into, let's say someone in a wheelchair, to get through a door, helps all of us. Yes, it helps the person with the wheelchair, helps the person with a temporary disability. Let's say they're on crutches and they can't finagle their hands very well because they're using their crutches. Some people who are carrying packages, bags, etc. And recently, with COVID, handicap push buttons are being used all the time due to COVID concerns of transmitting disease through touching a doorknob, etc. When you can mash the handicap button with your elbow, you're good to go. Now, inclusive design is a design approach that considers many different human factors. Those factors include abilities, age, gender, cultural background, but people with disability are not seen in this method as a special circumstance. Rather, they're seen as part of the multidimensional fabric of all of our users. So for example, our X1 voice remote control that Comcast introduced in 2015, where you can press a button and speak into your voice control, and it can do everything from look for a show, see what's on, record, find your favorites, etc. That was introduced in 2015, and leading up to that, the development, the design, etc., was part of this inclusive design approach, of which people like Tom Lidkowski, who I mentioned before, our Vice President of Accessibility, had a seat at the table, but it wasn't all about, oh, we've got to solve this for people with disabilities. This voice control has been so widely adopted that we're now, X1 is receiving 1 billion voice commands a month. So I'm going to show you how inclusive design approach is the most likely to boost creativity and generate innovation, and that's why you should really tend towards inclusive design and inclusive development. As I mentioned, accessible design has a potential, well, let's start with this first, I'm sorry. The potential to create business opportunities. I mentioned that people with disabilities have a $200 billion spending, sorry, a discretionary spending. So how can that market be used and leveraged in our products and services? And I want to give you markets that would not have existed without an accessible solution. So they're more like the curb cut methodology. Eyeglasses, eye contact lenses, sorry about that. Eyeglasses, eye contact lenses were created as an accessibility device to help people see. But what's happened is cosmetic contact lenses have become really big, especially overseas, especially in Japan. It's a very huge market, but it's really a huge market everywhere. And the cosmetic contact lens market in 2017 was valued at over 600 million US dollars. With fashion eyewear, Luxottica Group, which started in the early 60s, they saw a niche. Using eyeglasses was very common. Could they make it a luxury product? So they're now the leader in premium luxury and sports eyewear. They own places like Ray-Ban and others. They make eyewear, mainly they make eyewear for designer brands. So they make them for eyewear for Chanel, for Versace, Dolce & Gabbana, Tory Burch. And their annual revenue was almost $9 billion in 2018. Now I'm going to go to the idea that inclusive design has the potential to create innovation. And what you see here is the Walt Disney Concert Hall in LA. And this proves that it's constraint and not limitless freedom that drives genius. So Frank Gehry is the architect. And he said that what really inspires all of his work is actually limitations and constraints. As he said, constraints give us a starting point and some building blocks to work with. If you want to see some of his other work, take a look at the Strata Center and on the MIT campus. It looks like a Ripley building. It's beautiful. And also take a look at the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain. But what's interesting, what drove the outside was what drove the inside. And this is the inside of the concert hall. And the criteria was very strict. It was strict standards for acoustics. And the Disney Group really wanted to push this into absolutely impeccable acoustics. And Frank Gehry was the right person for the job. And this building has won awards. Its acoustics have won awards, and they're wowing people to this day with concerts there. And interestingly enough, Frank Gehry said his most challenging project was actually a house design with 0 constraints. We actually need constraints in order to get creative. So take a moment to think about Legos. Imagine you had 6 regular, 8-sided Lego bricks. Imagine the number of building combinations possible with this very strict standard of using only 6 regular 8-stud Lego bricks. The combinations are not in the hundreds, nor are they in the thousands. There are actually 900 million different ways to combine these 6 blocks. A study done at the University of Amsterdam investigated how obstacles affect global and local processing, and their findings show that people who were primed to think with a constraint frame of mind scored 40% better in creativity than those without an obstacle to be solved for. So hopefully I have convinced you that accessibility as a constraint will provide, tapping into that discretionary spending, and will provide the opportunity for amazing creativity if we do it from the beginning. So how do we start? I first want to warn you of the Q5 syndrome. Perception is that accessible design and accessible development will be a heavy lift. So the Q5 syndrome goes something like this. We all know it's the right thing to do. We know that we want to make sure we do it, so we put it into the backlog. But this task seems daunting. We're unsure how to start. We assume it's going to be difficult, though in reality, it really isn't. It's when people actually find how to do accessibility and build it into their products, they're like, what? I mean, that was all that was? The reality is quite different. But assuming that it's going to be difficult, we decide to put it in as a feature to bolt on later. So we assign it as a feature rather than a success criteria. And then we find ourselves slowly deprioritizing it, keeps getting pushed down in the backlog until it ends up in Q5. I've even heard teams say, well, it's not in our budget for 2019, or it's not in our budget for 2020. And that's a mindset we need to get away from. So first things first, make accessibility a success criteria. That should be business as usual. The compelling case for designing accessibility right from the beginning is that, for example, you may, adding it as a success criteria, you might add at most an extra point on your user story pointing. But if you're thinking of it as a feature, that feature may be a 13-point feature, it might end up being an epic, and often never gets done. So BAU, make accessibility a success criteria. This should be for everything. So we're not just thinking about websites, we're not just thinking about web applications, we're not thinking about mobile applications. We are thinking about all of them, but we're also thinking about IoT. We're also thinking about gaming. We're also thinking about videos. We may be creating videos for our products. We may be creating training videos internally, etc. Those videos, right from the get-go, work with the video production company to make sure on your, your sheet of things to do for delivery, it that those videos must be closed captioned and video described. Also presentations like the one that I am using here, make sure that your presentations are accessible. As I mentioned, there is a large minority of people who have color blindness. One of our senior vice presidents in our company is colorblind. And so if we have a chart, he's red, green, colorblind. And if we have a chart that says, well, the red bar or the green bar, he says, point to the bar because I can't tell the difference. So make sure that the color and the content is accessible. And there are ways, there are lots more than just color. There are lots of ways, and I could answer those questions later if you have any, to make sure your presentations are accessible. As I mentioned before, our Vice President of Accessibility, Tom Lankowski, maybe I did not mention, but he has been blind since birth. So we're always making sure that he can have a copy of the presentation, just like I make it. I don't have to make a separate document. Nobody else has to make a separate document. If we're doing presentation, we just make sure our presentations are accessible for him. So you may have heard of WCAG. WCAG is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's now at 2.1 version. And WCAG was created by the W3C, the W3C's WAI, which is the Web Accessibility Initiative. Now, I'm saying web a lot. You can drop the word web because back then, you know, early on in this kind of environment, web was new, so everything was tagged web. But this is for the same thing for gaming, the same thing for apps. So just drop the web. That's kind of an archaic initial term. But WCAG 2.1 guidelines are broken into 4 general categories, and so they're much easier to remember. They're perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And I'm going to give you just a couple examples from WCAG 2.1 on each of these. So for perceivable, one of the criteria is to provide text alternatives for non-text content. So you guys have heard of the alt tag, and the alt tag is not just for web. There's alt text that you can do in mobile applications, in PowerPoint and Word, etc. Providing text alternatives so that someone using, let's say, a screen reader, because they can't see what's on the screen, will be able to hear what's on the screen. Another one is provide captions and other alternatives for multimedia. So I mentioned already closed captions, I mentioned video description, I've mentioned, what I haven't mentioned is what about transcripts? Let's say it's just audio only. A transcript would be an excellent alternative. For operable, I have a few here. Make all functionality available from a keyboard. So many people can't use a mouse. Tom can't use a mouse because he can't see where the pointer is. Someone who has ALS can't use a mouse, so they may be using an eye tracking device. And they may be using a switch that is like a kind of like an easy button that they can mash, and or their enter key. Those are all keyboard or keyboard-like devices, so that they can select the item that is in focus. Give users enough time to read and use content. And here's another one. Do not use content that causes seizures or physical reactions like vertigo. So Blink, I mean, nobody uses Blink, but it's amazing how many people get pretty close with their whiz-bang apps, their games, etc., that can cause seizures. It doesn't mean don't use that. It means give an alternative. can someone go to content that will not cause seizures, or can they turn on an option that stops movement, or can they pause movement? That is the content that will not cause seizures. Okay. For understandable, make text readable and understandable. And I have a great example for that from Philadelphia, from the food stamp program in Philadelphia many years ago. They were moving everything over to digital. So instead of people coming in and signing up, long lines, signing up to get their food stamps, they made it where you could go onto your computer, you could go onto a computer at a library in order to order your food stamps, and then they'd come in the mail. The problem is that when they rolled this out, the use of food stamps dropped tremendously. And they weren't sure why, so they thought, well, maybe it's because people are used to coming in, so we're going to put kiosks in the room that people would normally come into to sign for their stamps. And what happened was people weren't even using that. People were going up to it and walking away. So children were not eating because of something. And they could not figure out what, until finally someone realized, well, the text on the screen that people have to go through in order to read and do their food stamp order was written by a lawyer. And when they changed it to a grade level 2 reading level, all of a sudden, everyone was using it again. So that's a perfect example of making text readable and understandable. And finally, an example for robust. Maximize compatibility with current and future user tools. So if you have an app and you know that you're going to create a part of it that works on an Apple Watch, make sure that you've got compatibility as you move into Apple Watch usage. Or if you're creating an Xbox game, or you're creating a smart fridge, tools, environments are going to just continue to change. Make sure that the person with a disability does not get a lesser experience, but they get the same amount of wow as someone who, let's say, can see or who can use the mouse, etc. By the way, you may have heard, if you've heard of WCAG, you may have heard of A, AA, and AAA. Those are levels. I've never heard of anyone using A because it's so basic, it's laughable. And it is not what's required by the FCC or other entities. So AA is a minimum requirement for most companies and most products and most services, but AAA would be for government entities, for education, etc. Now, I mentioned red-green colorblind. I want to just show you how easy accessibility is. It's really not daunting. So imagine I've got two buttons, and these buttons are in red and green. And there's a caption on the bottom that says, "You've just won $1 million. Press the green button if you would like the money." Well, someone who's red-green colorblind may press the right button instead of the left. The right button is the red button. The left button is the green button. And there may be people on the call right now who have color blindness, and they can really perceive what I'm discussing here. So it's really not a heavy lift. Simply add a text, a text alternative. Yes, I want the money. No, I don't. You could also, on the left button, have a check mark and the right button have an X. But remember, Tom, who's blind, our Vice President of Accessibility, would not be able to see an X or a check. So you can use the X in the check, green X, red check, but also the green X has an alternative text in the alt attribute that says yes, and the red one says no. Perfect example. Can you imagine if you're adding buttons to an interface and you're doing accessibility as a success criteria? This wouldn't even add a point. It wouldn't take another 10 seconds to do. But can you imagine later on saying, okay, we're going to do all the buttons throughout the interface, and then later we'll go back and label all of them. And now you're looking at a 13-point story to go and try to find every single button. Did you miss any? Go back and ask UX, what did you want me to put on this one? Maybe it wasn't yes or no, maybe it's submit, or do you want me to say okay? So that's a perfect example of the benefits of doing this right from the beginning and how easy it really can be. Now, you need to know what you need to do. So you have to develop your knowledge base. And so here's some of the ways that you can do this best. You can go to the W3C's Web Accessibility Initiative website. You can look up WCAG 2.1 criteria. You can also look at the Web Accessibility Initiative's training videos. I will post these links in Slack later on, so you can have all of these. You can work with consultancies. This is a great way to start. And then as you're working with these consultant groups, you start to learn more and more and more, and then you can rely on them less and less. So consultancies include the Paciello Group, DQ, that's D-E-Q-U-E. I should say Paciello is spelled P-A-C-I-E-L-L-O. Paciello Group, DQ, D-E-Q-U-E, Level Access. Those are just some. Now, there are a lot of flash in the pan consultancies that are coming out that are not worth their salt. In fact, I often, when a new consultancy will try to encourage me to use their services, I actually look at their website. It's amazing how these flash in the pan accessibility consultancies, their own stuff isn't even accessible. So stick with some of the big ones. Another great way, get your people trained through conferences. There's the CSUN conference annually in February and March. That's capital C, capital S, capital U, capital N. And it's called the CSUN Accessibility Conference. And it is not just web, mobile, etc. It's physical devices, it's learning, it runs the gamut. It's the largest international accessibility conference, and it's 3 days of non-stop sessions, 45 minutes each. You are going from one place to the other. You are learning so much. If you really want to learn in a more 2 or 3 hour and a more workshopy environment, Access U, that's A-C-C-E-S-S, capital U, all run together. That's in May. They're running virtually this year, so I'm sure it'll be less expensive. And then there's the AHEAD conference, all capitals A-H-E-A-D, which stands for Access in Higher Education and Disability, which is in July. You may not be working in higher education, but it is excellent. You will learn so much because their guidelines are dealing with AAA. So you learn from them and then you back it down to AA. Then where if you want to have a one-off question, you're developing something, you're not sure, please do not go to Stack Overflow. I can't tell you. I would say about 80% of what's on Stack Overflow as far as accessibility is wrong. I've even gone around trying to to fix it and say, no, you should do it this way. Too much of a daunting task. So where can you go to ask? I would suggest getting a membership with the IAAP, that's the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. And you can find them at accessibilityassociation.org. And there's a part there, there's got a lot of training. You can get certifications in accessibility development and design, etc. And you can just ask questions. People who are doing the work. You'll see people from the Paciello group or from DQ or from Level Access answering questions. You'll see people who use the services answering questions. Then you want to consider automated and manual testing, you know, as a gating methodology for CI/CD. You can use, many of these companies have their own enterprise solutions for automated testing, manual testing, and etc. But some of them also have free plugins. Axe is the plugin, there's the Chrome plugin for DQ. I think it's also on Firefox as well. And they are, as well as having a Axe Enterprise is also another solution with them. ARC is an enterprise solution, ARC, for automated testing and reporting by the Paciello group. By the way, you may hear the Paciello group as TPG, the Paciello group. They've been calling themselves TPG the last year or so. With ARC is nice because it's got a great reporting tools so that you can show project leads, senior leadership, etc., how you're doing. It's also great for, they add manual testing. Level Access does manual testing. They also have an enterprise solution as well. I personally like Axe for the free Chrome plugin the best, and I like ARC for the enterprise solution the best. That's me personally. People have different things that they like or don't like. Wave, all capitals WAVE, is a free plugin. But remember, this is not the be all and end all. These plugins, these tests, especially if they are not written specifically as an automated test, but they're just your general crawl tests, they will pick up 20 to 60% of issues. And the more complex the interface is, the less issues it will pick up. So use it as a first pass, or really work on developing your automated testing scripting. I'll give an example of why I say 20 to 60%. So just general screen crawl testing does not understand intent. So it's great if it finds a button and it says, oh, there's no alternative text here, or there's no text that I can detect on this button or this div which has a ARIA. We're not going to go into ARIA, ARIA, you can look that up, but it has an ARIA role that assigns it as a button. If it finds those, it can test it, but if it just finds a div with a click event, it's going to go right past that because it does not understand the developer's intent was that thing looks like a button. I'm trying to make it a button. It does not understand that. So these things will slowly get more intelligent, these automated general tests, but until then, and really forever, you should always follow that up with really well-scripted testing and some manual testing. The next thing is, how are you going to go into the design, into the development, and know that you are thinking in terms of people who are who have a disability. So I would suggest you leverage personas. You may already be leveraging personas. Your design team may be leveraging personas. Users that you expect to be using your product, and designing for Sally and Joe, and you've given them personalities and things that they do and things that they like. Make sure that you have personas for people with disabilities and differing disabilities. How do you find personas? There are a couple of ways, instead of having to write them all yourself and guessing. There's a wonderful book called A Web for Everyone, Designing Accessible User Experiences. Now, again, drop the web because it's really more than that now. It's by Sarah Horton and Whitney Quisenberry. Excellent book, quick read, packed full of stuff, and they've got like 10, 12 personas that you basically can just cut and paste or copy, etc. The Web Accessibility Initiative, the W3C organization, also offers personas and perspectives. So take a look at their personas, their perspective videos. That's a great set of videos I actually worked on, since I'm part of that working group. So I will, again, I'll send those links out to you. But personas will only get you so far. My friend Sam Yale, when I was first learning to be, learning about accessibility, he really took me under his wing and helped me out. And one of the things he said to me one day is, Adina, closing your eyes does not make you blind. Because I was giving him an idea. I was like, okay, so I'm going to be doing this. And I figured, well, would you want to have this, this, and this? And he's like, you're thinking as a sighted person who's closed your eyes. Closing your eyes does not make you blind. So we see that missing the mark often. And here are two examples of missing the mark. We assume what someone with a disability needs. And on the left are the Robeson Square steps in Vancouver. Beautiful, beautiful steps, a work of art. They're steps that, they're marble steps, lots of marble steps, with a zigzag ramp going through them, so that people, supposedly with wheelchairs or pushing strollers, etc., could use them. The problem is the designer never actually checked with someone who would be using those ramps, and the ramps are too steep to safely navigate. And can you imagine the hairpin turns as someone is losing control of their wheelchair? It is also a tripping hazard for people with visual impairments, because the stairs are all the same color. So it makes it difficult to determine where one step ends and the next one begins. And there are no railings, so nothing to lean on. If you trip, you're going to face plant straight down. And by the way, who takes steps in a zigzag pattern anyway? You're going to have to negotiate those ramps in between. So beautiful work of art, nobody uses them. So it doesn't really make any sense that they created this if no one's going to use it. So the one on the right was Project Aslan. And actually, this is not a picture of the hand, which was a 3D printed hand, but I could not find a one with free use. So it was something like this, but a little bit more crude, 3D printed hand. Well, what's that all about? Well, it's a robotic arm that translates spoken word and written text into finger spelling, you know, A, B, C, D, you know, all of that. So A, N, D, etc. Oh, it got so many write-ups, awards, everything. but they never actually asked people who would have been the beneficiaries, people who were deaf, who American Sign Language, or there are different kinds of sign languages, but we'll just say American Sign Language, that's their first language. They didn't actually talk to them, and therefore they didn't realize that fingerspelling is rarely used in ASL. ASL is more about symbols. Also, ASL doesn't just use the hand, it uses the face. All of that was missed, and so therefore the people that would have been the beneficiaries, the deaf community, went meh, and it died on the vine. So how do we do this? How do we make sure we're not missing the mark? We want to make sure we're capturing the voice of the customer. You are not your customer. That should be in everything, not just accessibility. We need to always remember that mantra. We are not our customer. So get customer feedback about their experiences and their expectations for your products and services. Use focus groups, paper prototyping. After you prototype, bring people from different communities, that holistic, not just people with accessibility challenges. Again, holistically, paper prototyping, contextual inquiry, where you're doing a one-on-one reaction in that user's home or in that user's, with that user's device in their environment, and see what their normal activities with those devices, et cetera, are. Usability tests, you know, the one-way mirror kind of thing, customer callbacks after it's been launched, and social media channels to see what the chatter is all about. So hopefully you've gotten, this is a lot, but you've gotten a really kind of a soup to nuts general idea of how you can move forward with accessibility. And I'm going to open it up for any questions.
Sure, if you guys have any questions, let's type them into room A. Somebody's typing. There, applause, applause.
Oh, thank you. I'm gonna stop sharing my slides here.
Are you seeing the questions, Adina? Neurodiversity is relatively new. What are some key things you would want to see handle it?
Oh, that's a good question, especially as someone who's neurodiverse myself. One of the things is understanding that neurodiversity is not just someone who has autism or just someone who has a learning disability or dyslexia, etc. So I would go to the persona methodology and really capture some different personas and really do some research and find out what are the challenges for someone with autism in how they parse information. What are the challenges of someone with low processing speed? So they may have some similar challenges to someone with autism, but there'll be a lot of differences. What about the person with dyslexia? What can we do? Can we change the font to make sure that we're not using a font where the B and the D look like just opposites of each other, or where the A has an extra kind of shape so it doesn't look like a D that's been kind of truncated. So that would be, let's say, for dyslexia. And there are fonts out there that just generally work. I can't remember, there are one or two that we often use, you know, that the world often uses that do fit that. For someone like me, who has severe ADHD, processing is very difficult. I get very confused by a lot of information. I will often, if there's a screen that's too busy, I'm blocking it out only to see the area that I need to read at the time. So less is more. Giving someone, giving an interface that has a lot of white space. And of course, white space doesn't need to be white, but it's an area where there's no information, and it allows the eye to rest. And if you watch somebody, their eye will flicker to those areas. It's practically imperceptible, but it's really not giving the eye a chance to rest, it's giving the mind a chance to rest. And that's something that I need. Give me only a couple suggestions to look at using, let's say, blinds or accordions, so I can unfurl what I want to see and I'm not inundated. More is nice. You can do A, B, C, D, or more. Another important thing is, you know, you've got an app and maybe the app switches horizontal to vertical. By the way, all apps must switch horizontal to vertical because I can read my iPad in both directions. But what about someone who's got their iPad bolted in just a horizontal position on their wheelchair? But when you're switching, make sure that the layout is generally the same. So where if they're expecting some information on the left, it'll always be on the left. Or it will be in, you know, maybe if it can't be on the left, it'll be, you know, first, because we generally will read left to right. If you switch it to a vertical, maybe that's first and the stuff on the right is second. Make those things constant throughout. And from one screen to the next, build in constancy or consistency. Oh, there was something else I was going to say, and oh, and also just wording, giving people enough time to read before they have to make a decision. And it's amazing how few companies have copywriters. Please get a copywriter, and you can even hire them temporarily when you're writing content. Let them write content, maybe take content and put it into level 2 schooling, level 3 schooling. You'll notice, in fact, if you look at certain websites, let's say Times, the New York Times or CNN, etc., their paragraphs are 1 sentence long for the most part, and they're very short sentences. So those are some things that you can think about people with neurodiversity. Does that answer the question?
Let's hope so. They can't talk back. There's a question from Audrey Trout, so I'm going to read it. Thank you for this very important keynote, Adina. It's from Audrey. I love Comcast's motto of building accessibility in rather than bolting it on. I've learned a ton about the dimensions in which our products can be more accessible for everyone. Thinking back on my life before Comcast, Audrey obviously works for Comcast, I think you're spot on that people assume these changes are harder to implement than they really are. But I have found that there is a learning curve for engineers and QAs learning how to test these accessibility features. What resources can you recommend for people learning how to exercise test features like VoiceOver, navigating without touch on their mobile phones or browsers?
Great question. YouTube is amazing for that. I learned how to use Dragon Naturally Speaking off of YouTube. You'll find anything, how to do anything with that. And there's also a site, and I can't believe I can't, let me see. Give me a second. Okay, it is I can't find it. Good gravy. I can't find out, for some reason off the top of my head, it's the people who did Wave. WebAIM. There we go. WebAIM, W-E-B-A-I-M. WebAIM stands for Web Accessibility in Mind. They have articles, and if you do, if you click on their articles, there are articles that talk about how to use a screen reader. You know, what the keys are, etc., to use the quick keys. And then just practice, play. If you've got a PC, you know, there's JAWS and NVDA. JAWS has come down in price, but it's still kind of pricey. But NVDA is an excellent free screen reader. It's only for PC, but it's great. Try it, play with it, use WebAIM articles to show you how to use it. And then if you've got a mobile phone, you've got an instant accessibility test. So for example, I've got an article from NPR on, you know, let's go to their NPR's main page. Okay, so there's that. And all I'm going to do is speak into my iPhone, turn on voiceover.
Okay, I turned on voiceover.
And so voiceover is on everybody's.
Safari, address, Golds and NPR logo, visited, station logo, donate, link, open navigation menu, button, and navigation, and NPR header, banner, menu pop-up.
Let's get down to you.
WHO set 6 conditions for ending a coronavirus lockdown. Heading level 3, link. Easing shutdowns has become a hot topic as economic output is now stalled in WHO set 6 conditions for ending.
There we go. Double. See, I use this all the time and I still forget. I double tap to stop. But you'll find those, you know, the swipe downs.
WHO set 6 conditions for ending.
Double tap 2-finger to stop, etc. Whoops. Or that. Just a second, guys. That was crazy.
Oh no, we opened Pandora's box.
And then you say voiceover off. Siri, turn off the music. Okay. So I've been doing this for years and I can't remember everything because I don't use it every single day like Tom does. It's not my life. But I still find myself going to WebAIM and going, okay, what was that swipe, the 3-finger one? But you can turn it on, you can turn it off, you know, turn off voice guidance or turn off video, what did I say? Voiceover. Talkback is the one for Android devices. And then just play.
All right, so we have time for just one last question from Dave Taylor. Are there good technical guidelines? He says that I remember looking at the federal guidelines many years ago and got overwhelmed. Are there good technical guidelines?
Good technical guidelines. So instead of, I guess you're saying instead of the W3Cs, you know, WCAG 2.1, I would do that over going to the US government's guidelines. If you're following WCAG 2.1 AA or AAA, if you're, like I said, government or educational institution, but generally, if you're following AA, you will be able to, it'll be less overwhelming, but the Web Accessibility Initiative has a working group called the Education and Outreach Working Group, which is the one that I'm on. That one, we worked on content for people with, you know, developers who are just starting out and going, okay, I need to make this, and I really don't know how. Give me an example. And there are lots of examples on there on how to, you know, how to label buttons, how to use ARIA, how to, what do I do when I'm creating a form to make it accessible? Should I use a label? Should I use the placeholder text, etc. You can find that all on the Web Accessibility Initiative, and I'll send those links that will be able to help you with that. And then go to the conference. Access U is coming up. It's virtual. It's in May. So I would suggest signing up and going for that. But then the other thing is the International Accessibility Association of Accessibility Professionals. You can ask questions there.
All right, great. So this is all the time we have. Thank you so much, Adina, for doing the second day keynote. And we are going to see all of you guys in 15 minutes for our next talks.
Well, thank you, everyone. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.